Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway. That's John Prine, who died yesterday. Chris Christopherson said, I don't know, almost 2 decades ago, if God's got a favorite songwriter, I think it's John Prine. Born in 1946 in Maywood, Illinois, 10 years older than I am. And when I got my first job as a lifeguard at Waddell Pool in Niles, Ohio, back in the old days, Dan Hogan was the senior guard, took me aside. This was in the cassette tape days. Handed me John Prine, and I've been listening to him ever since. And it's very, very sad. Every songwriter out there just worth listening to recognizes John Prine as an extraordinary. We'll come back with Angels from Montgomery in the next segment. That's his probably most famous ballad that's been covered again and again. But the effects of coronavirus are everywhere and everywhere terrible. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's good news. Look, we're almost at 1.5 million cases worldwide. We are over 81,000 dead. In the United States, we have 24-hour death toll of 1,850. But yet, there is good news. If you watch the president's conference, the vice president's conference, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, we are turning corners everywhere. We have new problems, but we also have new focuses. The African-American community and the Native American community are particularly hard hit due to comorbidities. It was explained at length at the presser last night, which unfortunately some cable news stations inexplicably did not carry. Might have saved lives. But you've really got to double down on social distancing in close-knit families where any senior citizen has high blood pressure, has diabetes, is overweight. There are just enormous risks to them. So please do that. And we've bent the curve pretty much everywhere. And it's good news, and markets are showing that. But I must say, where we have not bent the curve is in cruelty. I have a new Washington Post column up this morning at the landing page at WashingtonPost.com, which I encourage you to send far and wide. Ignore the comments. There are 2,500 comments, which means that the crazies are out in force. It must have been a full moon last night. When it was posted, it's about, well, I'll read it to you. Quote, I want to give a special thanks to the president and to Jared Kushner, the official said. They told me yesterday they would get me 200,000 N95 masks to our public hospital system. Within 24 hours, they had delivered. The official? New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, D., Democrat, speaking last week. Now that we've established that anything is possible, let's reflect a bit on what this burst of nonpartisan goodwill might illumine for us. In 1996, when now Senator Lamar Alexander was a presidential candidate, he gave a stump speech that still lingers in the memory. It's rare for a stump speech, but it's memorable for a reason. Alexander liked to quote author Alex Haley, a fellow Tennessean and author of Roots, who liked to tell people, find the good and praise it. De Blasio was doing that vis-a-vis President Trump and Kushner. And Kushner, a senior White House advisor and Trump's son-in-law, has done much more than that. The Project Air Bridge that Kushner is helping direct has flown not just masks to New York, but also critically needed supplies to hot spots across the country. Kushner has overseen an effort to roll out new testing technologies to hospitals, physician offices, and drive-through sites, and led another to ramp up production of ventilators by more than 100,000 units in the next 100 days. My contact, Hugh Hewitt's contact with Kushner, is limited to a trio of phone calls when I opposed a Justice Reform Act he had championed. It was a first for me in more than 30 years of broadcasting. A key architect of a bill heard about my objections to the measure, tracked me down, and then called me back when he and his colleagues had addressed the issue that concerned me. That impressed me. So I was happy to hear that Kushner was part of the task force led by Vice President Pence, a task force similar to one I urged on the president in this post, in the Washington Post in late February. Now, however, Kushner is taking a lot of heat because of a misunderstanding of the nature of the federal stockpile of key pandemic supplies. Amid the usual suspects to tear into Kushner, late-night host John Oliver, Vanity Fair, and the New York Times. Lyndon B. Johnson's famed complaint. If one morning I walked on top of the water across the Potomac River, the headline that afternoon would read, "President Can't Swim." Well, that came to mind as slings and arrows fell on Kushner. It seems to me, Hugh Hewitt, that most of the president's critics on the left and in the media will have none of the good efforts of Jared Kushner or his colleagues because they fear the president may win re-election if he presides over a V-shaped economic recovery, which is inextricably tied to effective medical intervention and vaccine development. When this plague has passed, there will be time enough to hand out awards for who was asleep at the switch and who drove innovations and breakthroughs. But there is no need now to incessantly attack the people who are leading the response. Perhaps take the injunction from Haley to find the good and praise it, and tape it on the computer from which you work at home. There is little merit in condemning the well-intentioned and none in slamming the providers of help to the front lines of the battle. Shame should attach to those intent on politicizing this catastrophe. The public won't forget either those who helped or those who stood by and jeered. That's my column. I'd ask you to go to the Washington Post, scroll down, it's on the landing page, and send it everywhere. Find the good and praise it. Find the good and praise it. Coming up on this show, Admiral James Stavridis, Morgan Ortagus, who's the State Department spokesperson, Byron York, David Drucker, Congressman Mike Gallagher. We've got Matt Yerbic, who's the CEO of Aviation Technical Services, because the Congress is at work at Phase 4. We've got to make sure it helps out American workers first. Austan Goolsbee, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama, joins me today. Michelle Reed, one of the young influencers who is just exploding on YouTube. Arthur Herman, the author of Freedom's Forge from the Hudson Institute. Jim Daly from Focus on the Family. Speaking of exploding on YouTube, more and more of you are following the show every morning on YouTube on my channel. Just go to youtube.com, type in Hewitt, and you'll be tied in. Let me tell you about Job Creators Network since I'm talking about Phase 4. The President, Mitch McConnell, Speaker Pelosi are working on replenishing the Small Business Fund. That means that JobCreatorsNetwork.com needs your help right now. Go join it. JobCreatorsNetwork.com is representing small businesses in a way that no one else is inside the Beltway. You, if you're a small business person, need to belong to JobCreatorsNetwork.com. Put your stories and ideas out there. Also want to tell you, check the markets overnight, brought to you by Birch Gold. Now, Birch Gold, if you want to learn about it, you text my name, Hugh, to 474747. And diversify. Gold is at $1,687. I started telling you to diversify when it was at $1,400. And I'm going to keep telling you to diversify because I think worldwide, even as America emerges, and some stocks do very, very well in the United States, like Amazon, which I own. I own all mutual funds in Amazon. That's it. I do one stock at a time, so I know what I'm doing and can follow it. But I bought gold last year, and I think you need to diversify, especially if you have an asset that increased in value over the last 2 months of craziness. That asset in your retirement portfolio probably should diversify at least a portion of it in a gold or silver physically backed IRA, which is what Birch Gold does. So just text my name, Hugh, to 474747. And that is the best thing to do. Birch Gold, or you can go to HughGold.com as well, HughGold.com. But just text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. I told you gold is at $1,687. Worldwide, the news is mixed. In Japan, which is a good sign, the market is closed up 2% again. But in Hong Kong, it's down because I think they've got a second wave in China and people are beginning to understand China lies. Not necessarily the South China Morning News, but China generally. England and Germany down a little bit this morning. Light crude, though, is up 3%. That's good. Maybe the oil war is done. Maybe we can get back to business in the oil patch and the sectors around. Halliburton is up 5%. I mean, there are good news everywhere. The 10-year Treasury's at 0.75%, easing back up to 1%. I think bonds are on the table. There's a lot on that package. Don't forget as well, No Safe Spaces starring Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla will make you laugh and make you cry. If you've got another long day at home ahead of you, go to nosafespaces.com. Use the code SALE25, get 25% off SALE25, and enjoy some Dennis and some Adam. a good way to get through this. Come right back. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. John Prine has passed away, lost to the world of people who love great music. I heard two things yesterday that I think you need to hear. The first comes from Dr. Birx at the presser, and unbelievably, some of the cable channels had cut away, thereby denying the historically black colleges and universities the message that was intended for them. Here's Dr. Birx, cut number 20.
But really talking to the community of health advocates, to the community that works on the social determinants of disease and the communities of the historic black colleges and universities. We really need to improve messaging, and I'm asking them to help us increase the messaging around this. We don't want to give the impression that the African American community is more susceptible to the virus. We don't have any data that suggests that. What our data suggests is they're more susceptible to more difficult and severe disease and poorer outcomes. And we really need to make sure that every household is aware of what it's going to take to protect the individuals in that household that have pre-existing conditions.
Dr. Birx then went on to specifically ask labs on or near Native American reservations and underserved communities to pull a particular lab machine out of their inventory. I think it was the Abbott M1. Again, most of America didn't see this. It was an appeal to lab directors that they wouldn't have seen because of the irresponsibility of Manhattan Beltway media elites that hate Donald Trump so much that they are deranged and their coverage is broken. The American media's coverage is just broken. Luckily, Andrew Cuomo, the Democratic governor of New York, is not suffering from TDS. He had a bit of an announcement yesterday that I didn't see covered anywhere else about whether or not an antibody test, which is the magic bullet here, is anywhere close. Cut number 9.
And that is an entirely new field that we're just developing now, right? New York State Department of Health developed an antibody testing regimen that Department of Health has approved for use in New York State. That has to be brought to scale, and the Department of Health is going to be working with the FDA to do just that. This tests the blood to determine whether or not you have the antibodies, which means you had the virus and resolved the virus. That's why you would have the antibodies for the virus. That would mean that you're no longer contagious.
So the good news is, we know what that means. That means that the New York Department of Health has one. I hope that it gets certified by the FDA and they can scale. Mayo's working on one. Research Triangle Company's working on one. We got to get them done. Joe Biden, meanwhile, contrast Andrew Cuomo's calm competence with Joe Biden talking about growing up with Bob Casey in Scranton. The former vice president had moved from Scranton years before Senator Casey was born. Cut number 3.
There's no better friend I have than Bobby Casey. We go back a long way. We grew up in a neighborhood in Scranton that were literally 4 blocks away from one another. Same parish, same schools, although he went to Scranton Prep. I'd left by that time. I was doing a virtual, almost the same kind of place I went to in Claymont, Delaware. A little steel town.
I just think that the vice president's reaching there. He had left Scranton years before Casey was born. He can clear that up some other time. Anthony Fauci, speaking of going to school, said this yesterday, cut number 28.
If we start talking about the things where the curve goes down and we really have minimal, how we respond and what kind of a rebound we see or don't see, I think is going to have a lot of influence, probably more immediately on things like summer camps than it does in the fall. I fully expect, though I'm humble enough to know that I can't accurately predict, that by the time we get to the fall, that we will have this under control enough that it certainly will not be the way it is now, where people are shutting schools.
All right, hey, moms and dads everywhere are saying, yay, break out the champagne. School will be back in the fall. Now, Tony Fauci was careful to be not overly optimistic, but that's a start. When I come back, Admiral Stavridis joins me to discuss where the Navy goes next. After the acting secretary resigned, the captain fired, the president saying, we'll fix it. We'll find out how from the Admiral. Stay tuned. Okay, what else? Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for joining me. As you probably know, if you watched the president's press conference last night, Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Modly turned in his offer of resignation. It was accepted by Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. Captain Crozier remains hopefully convalescing from the coronavirus. And now I'm joined by Admiral Stavridis to talk to us about what happens next. Admiral, I don't see there's much point in debating what happened. It is what it is. But can you tell me who's running the Navy right now other than the CNO and who the CNO is answering to?
Yeah, I can actually. First of all, we do have a terrific CNO, Admiral Mike Gilday. He's only been in the job about 6 months, so he's still very early in a 4-year tenure and dealing with, a big challenge, a big event here. Here's the good news. The administration moved swiftly to take the Undersecretary of the Army, who happens to be, stay with me here, a retired two-star admiral. His name is Jim McPherson. He's the former head of the Navy JAG Corps, like the television show. He was our top lawyer. He's a very steady hand. He obviously knows jurisprudence inside and out, but he knows the Navy inside out as well. So he's going to come over from the Department of the Army and be the acting Secretary of the Navy. I think that switch will close formally today if it hasn't already.
All right, so that's great. So there, again, civilian control is of paramount importance in the history of the United States Navy. Now, does the curtain come down? I talked about this with Acting Secretary Modly. I am not comfortable talking about strategic assets of the United States and how they're faring. Is the curtain going to come down on our carriers and our Ohio-class submarines and other assets of the Navy and whether or not they are seaworthy and virus-stricken?
I think up to the point of ships having to deviate completely from their schedule. In other words, I think it'd be foolish on the part of the Navy in a case like the Roosevelt to simply maintain a veil of silence while you pull a 5,000-person ship into Guam. That's going to get out immediately. It's going to look extremely strange. There'll be conspiracy theory around it. I think you're better off being straight and saying, hey, we're taking the ship offline for a while because of coronavirus. Now, what I would advocate for is you don't have to say every 5 minutes that on an Ohio-class boomer there are 6 cases and then the next day there's 9 cases. And so I think you can keep those lifelines closed at a minor level. But once you start moving ships in and out of ports, families know about it, media sees it. These are big physical assets. So, yeah, let's use common sense. But when you do make a major muscle movement, like pulling a ship offline, face up to, hey, we've got a problem, we're taking steps to deal with it, I think that will be the way going forward.
You know, the magazine, The Navy Proceedings, will probably be writing about this week for years and decades to come. I'd like to change subjects if I could with you because there's going to be another Phase 4 and Phase 5 coming out of the Congress. In Phase 3, I am told because of OMB's unfortunate call to the leader, there was no money for the Navy to plus up its shipbuilding. If there is a Phase 4 and 5, what ought the Navy to ask for, Admiral?
As you and I have talked about, first of all, we need to get the ship numbers up. No matter how exquisite and capable each one of our warships are, you are not going to be able to have the same ship in 2 places at once. And you've heard me use this quote before, but quantity has a quality all of its own. So we've got to get the numbers up. We just don't have enough ships to meet the demand signal coming from the combatant commanders. And I think that's kind of a minimum of 350 ships or so. Number 2, we ought to be building ships that have that are capable of operating in the littoral and going into that second, beyond the third island chain, second island chain, and going toe-to-toe with China in the South China Sea. That means better stealth capability. It probably means a significant number of unmanned vessels, which will reduce risk in those waters. And then third and finally, Hugh, I'm a big proponent of undersea warfare, and that's going to mean looking at our submarine numbers. They're highly capable, obviously, and I think they would play very well in this emerging era of great power competition. So there would be 3 things to be thinking about.
Now, Admiral, the top line of shipbuilding threatens to be swallowed whole by the replacement of the Ohio-class, as you mentioned, boomer, which has a shelf life. It can't be extended. And that is, I think, $8 billion or something. That's just a large part of the annual number. Should Congress forward appropriate that money and give? I don't even know who builds that ship. That's how little I know. I'm a civilian. But what do you think about forward appropriating and depositing out of that money? It sends a huge signal above the noise about our commitment to that program if we forward appropriate it.
I agree with that. And I think that here you get into whether we need to think about those Columbia-class boomers, ballistic missile submarines. Boomer is, of course, the nickname for them. Are those really Navy assets? I don't think so in the following sense. They're really national assets. The same way our strategic bomber force is a national asset, and our intercontinental ballistic missiles that come out of ground silos are national assets. I think that pot of money for all three of those assets, you can do creative things as you described, take it kind of out of the mainstream day-to-day preparation and warfighting budget. Because, those Columbia-class ships are marvelous machines of war, but they're national machines of war, not Navy machines of war at the end of the day in terms of their purpose.
Now, I had spoken with Acting Secretary Modly once a month, January, February, March, and April, and at least 2 or 3 times I had talked with him about the frigate competition, which is underway, and a selection is drawing close. People thought maybe June. What would your advice be to the new Acting Secretary McPherson about that selection? Because in my view, the sooner the better the building gets going.
Exactly right. And it comes back to what we discussed a moment ago, which is quantity. It's getting ships out there. So I would say this is an opportunity for the Navy to not let perfect become the enemy of very, very good. In other words, let's get a plan. Let's move out. We know the parameters of what we need in that ship class. Let's have the ability to build them at scale, to build them quickly. And let's recognize that frigates are the eyes of the fleet, Lord Nelson used to say back in the 18th century. Today, they continue to be the eyes of the fleet in that you need a lot of them. They need to be able to go forward and fast. They've got to be able to defend themselves reasonably. They've got to have stealth qualities that permit them to do all those things. We know what we need in this vessel. Let's get it going. And as we say in the Navy, let's cut some steel. Let's start building them.
Now, Admiral, talk to me a little bit about the midshipmen whose lives have been completely upended. I know my wife's uncle ended up being a 3-year mid because World War II demanded, they were getting ready for Japan, even though he wasn't at war when they graduated. What's going to happen to these midshipmen who I don't think are in college right now?
You are correct. They are not at the academy. They're doing all of their schoolwork, if you will, online. They're being given a very strict regimen of physical fitness. They're meeting extant hours in front of those computers instead of hours sitting in a classroom. I know the superintendent at Annapolis extremely well, Vice Admiral Sean Buck, Naval Academy graduate, top tennis player there, by the way, just a wonderful leader. He's crafted a program, and it's very similar to what's going on both at West Point and at the Air Force Academy. I think the real question, Hugh, is are we going to get them back in the classroom physically in the fall? I think yes is the answer to that, but we're going to have a contingency plan if we can't. I don't think that's likely. I think the vast majority of the 4,000 institutions in the United States who grant bachelor's degrees are going to be in session this fall. But we're going to need a contingency plan if, God forbid, they're not. And then secondly, assuming we get through the worst of this, and I think we will by early to midsummer, there may very well be a second wave in coronavirus. Some predict that in the November-December timeframe. That would follow the Spanish influenza model. Look, we're going to be so much better prepared for that than we were for this first wave, but we need a second contingency plan in case we have to do another, again, God forbid, but another lockdown. All of that would then be ended by the arrival of the vaccine late this year, early next year. So a lot of contingency planning, but I'm confident the academies will be ready to deal with it.
Now, Admiral, what year did you do your plebe summer?
1972, Hugh. I'm proud class of 76, walked in the door then. We were the bicentennial class, graduated in 76, came in 72.
Now, every academy grad I've ever talked to tells me it's always getting easier, plebe summer. But are we going to have a plebe summer this year?
Yeah, no, that's the exact question. And I'll tell you, all kidding aside, and I remember this myself, you're so fired up to go to the academy, to put on that uniform, to put on the cloth of your nation, to be part of it, to stretch yourself, to challenge yourself. I think it would be so sad for those young 18-year-olds not to be able to walk in the gate at Annapolis. With every fiber of my being, I want that to happen. I think it will happen. Typically, Hugh, it happens first week in July, before the 4th of July. Very proud moment. Let's hope those plebes, as we call them, go walking through the door with colors flying.
Last question. I'm sure you were greeted as you received your diploma by either the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of State, or maybe the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I can't remember what the rotation is. Do you think we ought to have that ceremony come the fall for the midshipmen who miss it in June?
You know, I don't. I remember my ceremony very, very well. But this class, in that sense, Hugh, I think is going to be like those classes in the 40s. It's a sacrifice they have to make as the nation gets through this. I think it would be so disruptive to the Academy and to the Navy. At that point, would be pulling them out of flight school, pulling them out of their surface warfare courses, pulling the Marines out of TBS to come back to Annapolis for a June week, 4 or 5 day thing, or even a graduation. Disruptive. I don't think it works, and I don't think you're going to see other major universities doing that. A last thought on that, by the way. The rotation you speak of is the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of Defense. They rotate among the 3 academies, each one giving the graduation and handing out diplomas. My year, it was Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld.
Huh.
He handed me my degree. He promoted me to Ensign United States Navy. Flash forward to 2006, from 1976 to 2006, 30 years later, 29 years later, Secretary of Defense, he's back, he's Secretary of Defense, and he promotes me to my 4th star as an admiral. Don Rumsfeld is the bookends of my career, and was an incredibly dynamic leader that I worked for directly at one time. I remember my graduation quite well. Thank you.
Very shiny bookends, Admiral. Thank you for joining me. AdmiralStav.com, America. AdmiralStav.com. Join me as well in taking your relief factor right now. There it is. Got it on the camera if you're watching on HughHewitt.com or on YouTube. My 4 pills are going down the hatch with my lukewarm coffee because I'm doing 6 Mile after the show today, because ReliefFactor.com lets you do it. $19.95 gets you started. Come right back. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Yesterday, I heard Secretary of State Mike Pompeo give a 10-minute talk on an amazing number of Americans who've been repatriated. So I put out a request to my son, who works at the Department of State, if Morgan Ortagus, the State Department spokeswoman, could not join me. In fact, she can this morning. Morgan Ortagus, welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Great to have you.
Thank you, sir. It's my first time being on.
I know, and I'm just so happy on this occasion because when the Secretary of State said yesterday 45,000 Americans have been brought home by Department of State, I thought, I had not heard that number. Can you tell me about that story? It's incredible.
You know what? And it's even grown since he was at the podium yesterday morning. I'm just looking at our 5 a.m. update, and we're actually at 49,823 Americans that we've repatriated from around the world. These are on 483 flights. And this is from, I think it's at least 81 countries, if not more, that we've brought people from around the world. This has been something that the State Department has never experienced before. Often when we have to evacuate Americans or repatriate Americans, there is like a tsunami, God forbid, or an earthquake or some violence in a particular country or a region. We've never faced anything like this before, where we had to roll up our sleeves and literally bring Americans home from around the world. So it's been a 24/7 job for many weeks. We've been actually doing this since January. The coronavirus, I feel like, is very present in Americans' minds for the past month or so. But, you know, when everyone was watching Super Bowl Sunday, we were evacuating Americans out of Wuhan, off of cruise ships. We're still doing that. So we have about 20 to 25,000 Americans still abroad that may want to come home, and we're working to get every last American home that we can.
Now, the Secretary said at the podium you'd even gotten people out of Nepal from a place near Everest via some combination of flight and winding road and bus and crazy stuff. What is the impediment, if any, to the remaining 25,000? Are some, I gather, choosing to shelter in place?
So we've a couple of different scenarios. We've had a lot of people that have signed up as time has gone on. So they've sort of decided, you know, within the last week, okay, maybe I don't want to wait this out. Maybe I do want to come home. So one thing that we're telling everybody, if you're listening and you have family members, loved ones that are overseas, please don't try and wait this out. Please sign up at step.state.gov. I'll just say that one more time, just in case anyone has anyone overseas. It's step.state.gov. Sign up there so we can try and get you home. Now, some people are in, like, Europe, for example, in Germany, right? You can get a flight back to the United States. It's not a problem. But we're in places like Nepal. We're in places like Peru, for example, where people were maybe hours away from Lima, from the airport, and you have to get people in some countries. They're on orders, stand-down orders, and so they may not be able to travel. So we have to get some letters saying yes, they're allowed to travel to the airport. It's been pretty crazy, but we have a really dedicated team of Foreign Service officers around the world that, by the way, are putting their own health and safety at risk and not leaving in order to make sure that Americans get out first.
Let me repeat that because we have Steelers fans listening. Morgan Ortagus, STEP. STEP, is that it? Step.state.gov?
That's right, yes, sir.
Step.state.gov. What will they find when they go to step.state.gov?
It's a very easy way to register. Basically, that information will put you in touch with whatever embassy is closest to you wherever you are in the world, and you provide all of your information, and then you'll get what we call mascot messages. These are alerts that will tell you when flights are available, when you can get on them, and so that has been our main effort since January 29th.
Now, there are some parts of the world which are receiving very little attention. I've been focusing on Ecuador because of I've just got some visibility into Ecuador. It's a very bad situation there. Is there any part of the world that is beyond the State Department's reach to help people?
That's a good question. No one's asked me that. We don't have any that I'm aware of. We don't have any Americans that are trying to get repatriated out of, Pyongyang or North Korea for anything crazy like that. I don't think so. I think that we can, I have to say the individual stories that you hear from people is really heartwarming. People write us emails and notes. The Secretary shared some of them where they just say, I'm so proud to be an American, because they know we're not going to leave anybody behind.
Now, last question is switching subject on you, Morgan Ortagus. There's a report, I believe, in the Journal this morning that the talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government have hit a huge bump, that there is a threatened breakdown here. What can you tell me about the peace talks in Afghanistan, if anything?
Yeah, so the secretary talked about this a little bit yesterday at the podium. Here's what we know. It was, maybe it's been about 6 weeks ago at this point. I'd have to look at the exact date, but I traveled with Secretary to Pompeo to Doha. We signed the peace deal with the Taliban. Secretary Esper was in Kabul signing the joint declaration with the government of Afghanistan. We have tried to say this entire time, this is going to be messy. This is not going to be easy. If you look and study, as I know you have, at any end of war process, anytime you've got an insurgency like this and you're trying to get to a peaceful resolution, it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be easy. What we do know is we have hopeful signs. The two sides are talking to each other. We went to Afghanistan. I went with the secretary just a couple of weeks ago. We went on a surprise trip, and the secretary had to deliver a very tough message to Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, saying we need to get to a political resolution. So we're still confident in our people and our process that we're going to work this because there is no military end to Afghanistan. That's the situation that we're in.
Morgan Ortagus, State Department spokeswoman, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate everything that the Foreign Service is doing to bring Americans home. I really, on behalf of everyone who is home, thank you and thank them. I'll be right back, America. Byron York is next in the next hour of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to everyone from the ReliefFactor.com studio inside of the Beltway. As of Tuesday night, there were now 398,785 confirmed cases of the virus in the United States. That's up 8.3% overnight. 12,893 deaths. Again, death is a lagging indicator. There is good news out there as well. To discuss the entire picture, I'm joined by Byron York of course, the Washington Examiner and Fox News. Good morning, Byron. How is the York family? Everybody good?
Good morning, Hugh. Doing fine, and I hope you too.
Yeah. Let me begin with whether or not you sense the same thing I do in the briefings, that there is a general sense of optimism that we have flattened the curve, if not bent it dramatically.
Yeah, I think there was. I think it was pretty clear from the White House briefing yesterday that that was the message. And, it's a little bit kind of neck-snapping because today is Wednesday. I believe it was last Wednesday they come out and give this briefing that was clearly the most somber briefing of the whole crisis, in which they say the number of deaths could be 100,000 or could be 200,000. And so to come out 7 days later and suggest that perhaps maybe never mind, things are much better than that, I think it's extremely welcome news, but it could be confusing for some listeners.
Yeah, it is neck snapping. Now, Byron, about these briefings, I have never seen you in the White House briefing room. I don't go myself. I haven't ever asked. Do you ever go?
I haven't been in a number of years.
It seems to me that it would benefit everybody if we had a infusion of new perspective, by which I believe that some in the press corps, working very hard at no small risk, are in a rut, by which I mean they are returning to the same story. And I'm prompted to this by a story out of Columbus, Ohio this morning. In an attempt to thoroughly track the spread of COVID in Ohio, the Department of Health Director, Dr. Amy Acton, has become something of a star in the Buckeye State, is suggesting a random sample of a small number of the general population in order to determine how many people have got it. That's a question I think would be very well asked of Dr. Fauci or Birx, but it doesn't seem to me to be anything that is going to erupt out of this group of reporters. What do you think of my general concern in that specific question?
Well, look, the specific question is really interesting because, Ohio has done, reasonably good job at this. They have about 4,700 cases as I look at it right now, but they have not done a huge number of tests per million, so that they're not like a leader in testing. The question you ask about the White House briefing room, there is a herd mentality, there is a sense of groupthink, however you want to express it. And what you'll see in White House briefings is there'll be a story of the day or a couple of stories of the day, usually in the Washington Post or the New York Times, and then just everybody asked about those, and they ask the same thing over and over and over again. But with President Trump, things have been a little different. The difference being here, the president has been at the briefing all of these times. Stephanie Grisham, who the most recent White House press secretary, has just left the job to return to her former position in the First Lady's office. She never gave a briefing at all. So the Trump administration had basically done away with the idea of the spokesperson coming out, spending an hour parrying questions from the press, and then leaving. The president sort of one-upped everybody by starting to be much more accessible himself. All of these helicopter briefings where the helicopter is idling on the South Lawn. He comes out, he takes a lot of questions before getting on wherever he's going. So the president has been extremely accessible, and now even more so because he's been in the briefing room right in front of people for a very long time. Yesterday's briefing totally went about 2 hours. So this is not a quick in and out. What has happened is you've seen a number of encounters between the president and reporters. There was one with Peter Alexander of NBC, one with John Carl of ABC, one with Yamiche Alcindor of the NewsHour. and these become kind of fodder for the press to feed this opposition mentality they have. And so it becomes more of a boxing match than it becomes an exercise in information.
And by the way, you named three people who are acquaintances of mine, in two cases colleagues of mine, and I like them all. I think they're fine reporters. I want to broaden the lens a little bit to the media generally, as opposed to any specific individual, because I don't really want to criticize a specific individual. I just want to pose a theory of mine. We all know what confirmation bias is, and that's where we look for the information that confirms everything we already want to believe. I believe that we see settling into what I call generally Manhattan Beltway elite media outcome bias. They really want President Trump to lose, and they are biased against information and storylines that may in fact help him win in November, including efficacy in relief efforts and rebound in the economy. What do you think, Byron?
I think that's actually true. There does appear to be a feeling that if President Trump says it, then it must be wrong. I mean, there are some obviously there were problems with the White House response, because Dan Baltz did a story the other day on the Washington Post and said America was late to respond to a crisis again, and basically laid out how we've always been late to respond to crises, and the response in this instance was similar to responses in the past. The fact that it is a global pandemic, that it is in all over the world, that it's in industrialized modern countries in Europe, kind of indicates that this is not President Trump's fault, and yet there is this constant emphasis on real or perceived failings of the administration every day. There are kind of fantastical speculations, for example, that the president might personally profit from if the drug hydroxychloroquine were used, and then that's why the president was pushing this, because he wanted to make money, and it turns out that he really didn't have any financial stake in what is now a generic drug. So this sense of opposition can overwhelm the desire to actually get information.
And I want to pause on something you said, Byron, because it's perfectly on point. Outcome bias means that the lens isn't wide. Everything is driven by the United States election and bad news for Trump and criticism of Trump. I've been following Ecuador as my one data point that I can just focus on day to day. It is a disaster in Ecuador. They have run out of coffins. They're in cardboard coffins. It is very difficult to argue that anything Donald Trump did or did not do, or that the United States did or did not do, has anything to do with why Ecuador is reeling. And once one absorbs that fact, we come back to the original mover of the disaster, which is the Communist Chinese Party. That is the bottom line, isn't it?
Right. And also look at the terrible effects the disease has had in Spain, in Italy, in France, and a number of advanced European countries, some of whom have national health care. And just look at that and say, is this Donald Trump's fault? And in addition, we all know that when a lot of these wrap-ups are done after this disease finally subsides, you're going to find members of both parties not taking the disease seriously enough at an early stage. Because, I mean, that's just a human thing, and that's what humans of the Republican and Democratic stripe did mostly. There are some people who came out, like Tom Cotton, and said, this is a big deal, we need to take it seriously right now. We need to do A, B, and C, which was what most people didn't say at that time. So the fact that it is this global pandemic, that it is affecting all sorts of other countries at various stages of development, indicates that this is not something that if Donald Trump had simply reacted differently, it wouldn't have been in the United States. There are people on the left who are basically suggesting that Trump is responsible for every American death. And again, it's a global pandemic.
And that is not a rational point of view. Byron York is right in always being rational. Follow him on Twitter at Byron York. Follow his column in the Washington Examiner. See him on Fox News. And stay tuned. David Drucker, his colleague from the Examiner, joins me next on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway, where the United States Senate is looking to add $250 billion into the fund for small businesses. I'm joined by David M. Drucker of the Washington Examiner. Follow David at David M. Drucker. David, is there a chance that we'll get a voice vote on a resupply of the small business funding? Originally at $350 billion, it looks like it's just not enough.
Yeah, look, Hugh, I've been hearing from and talking to business owners, executives, people in industry, and they like the program. The question is whether there's enough money, but also whether it can get out there fast enough. And, banks have been dealing with some of their own challenges in terms of processing these loans, the rules they're setting up for processing the loans. I know there have been some issues, community banks scattered around the country versus the big banks that everybody knows about with all the big brand names. And so there's just a lot that is going into this, and I think Congress is trying to work it out. I don't think the question so much is do you get a voice vote in the Senate, right? I just think it's going to be a lot easier. But is there any hiccup in the House if it can get through the Senate just because there have been dissenting voices over there? Now, this is about the small business aspect of the rescue package. So in theory, it should be easier, and I think that these funds will help reassure small businesses. But I do think, and I know I've been talking to members of Congress about this, and I'm going to talk to Patrick McHenry, the top Republican on the House Financial Services Committee later today, about what Congress might have to do to facilitate getting the money to small businesses faster, because there have been some logistical hurdles in terms of processing the money.
In fact, as the head of the Nixon Foundation, I have got an application in for relief. As you know, museums everywhere have shuttered their doors. No one's going. And our bank is trying the best it can, but it's not used to it. It's new. I think we'll probably get the money next week. I don't think we'll run out of money. But I imagine every small business in America has asked for what is, in essence, business interruption insurance. And the cost of that is keep your people employed and ready to reopen, but the money needs to be there. The question is, will it get politicized, as everything in the country seems to be politicized? What do you hear?
Well, yeah, that's a lot of what I hear. Look, I interviewed a couple of weeks ago the owner of a restaurant in New York City that was booking $750,000 to $900,000 a month. And this is an award-winning chef with a great, thriving business that collapsed overnight. And he told me he had maybe 3 months of money to keep overhead going. He had let all of his employees laid them off so they could collect unemployment. And he really wants to reopen. And he was looking at this program. And the question is whether or not the different banks seem to have only so much money from the program allocated to them in order for them to loan. And so I think what the government has to do is not just make sure funds are appropriated, but make sure that no matter where small businesses are doing their banking, whether it's B of A, Wells Fargo, a community bank, and there are many of those around the country, that all of these banks, as long as you have loan applications that are deserving, that they have access to the money and access to it on the sooner side. And, Hugh, as you know, even when the government does things well, other than fighting wars, usually it doesn't move that quick. And this is a case where the bureaucracy has to move quick because there's just a finite amount of time at which businesses can stay afloat. The guy that I spoke to, the chef I spoke to, said he maybe could stretch for 3 months, but there are some teetering that maybe can stretch for just another couple of weeks, to where, unless they're going to get a break from landlords and all of these other debts, are not going to make it. And so that the key here is speed, but also that every bank have access to money for the loans that are deserving, that have the applications that are coming through its particular pipeline.
Last question, David, 30 seconds. This is phase 4, replenishment. Phase 5 is, do we do something new? Speaker Pelosi has ideas. Leader McConnell has ideas. I don't see that happening for 2 to 3 weeks. What do you hear?
Yeah, look, I don't think there's as much of a rush on the next big bill that could be upwards of $1 trillion. For the first couple of bills, we saw a huge rush. Congress and the administration, any administration, usually doesn't move that fast for that amount of money. I think they're a little bit more circumspect here, and what you're going to start to hear more of, at least from the Republican side, is when do you start to have target dates for reopening?
That's it. David M. Drucker on Twitter. Thank you, my friend. David M. Drucker coming up. Congressman Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin, where they voted yesterday. We'll find out what happened. There are no results anywhere on the web. Maybe Mike will know from the ReliefFactor.com studio. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. John Prine succumbed to coronavirus yesterday at the age of 73. Great loss to the country, great singer-songwriter, and we mourn his passing. I'm joined now by Congressman on the Hugh Hewitt Show, Mike Gallagher of the 1st District, or the 8th District in Wisconsin. Congressman Gallagher, good morning. How are you?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good. I cannot find out from anywhere what happened in the Wisconsin voting yesterday, whether Joe Biden won or Bernie closed the gap or who won the state Supreme Court justice race. What happened?
Well, we won't know until April 13th because of the understandably and unusually high number of mail-in votes, absentee ballots. As long as they were postmarked yesterday, April 7th, they will be counted until April 13th. So, and I don't even have any good internal polling at this point. So we'll have to wait about another week to find the full results.
All right, let me turn over then to the Navy, of which you are a member of the Sea Service as a Marine. Admiral Jim McPherson is the new acting Secretary of the Navy. I just talked to Admiral Stav. He's very confident of the competence of Admiral McPherson in this job. What say you, Congressman Gallagher?
Well, I don't know him personally, but certainly the Navy is in desperate need of strong leadership right now. Eventually, my hope is that is strong Senate confirmed leadership, visionary leadership along the lines of Jim Layman, because you look not only at this past week, but really the past 3 years, and they have been very difficult years for the Navy. And as for the specific situation with Acting Secretary Modly, it's very unfortunate that it came to this. And in hindsight, I think there were at least 3 different points where things could have gone differently. The first was obviously Captain Crozier's decision to send his original letter on March 30th. The second was the Secretary's decision to relieve Captain Crozier of command prior to the conclusion of an investigation. And the third was the Secretary's unfortunate comments in Guam over the weekend. Of those 3 decision points, I think I'm most concerned about the first, especially in light of the 2017 collisions, which occurred in the exact same part of the world. I want to know a lot more about what led Captain Crozier to send what he assuredly knew would be a career-ending letter, especially because he did not include in the CC line his direct report, Rear Admiral Baker, the Expeditionary Strike Group commander who was embarked on the Theodore Roosevelt and whose bunk was a few doors down from Crozier's. So I suspect there's a lot more to come out in the intermediate levels between the strike group, Pac Fleet, and the 7th Fleet levels. But putting that aside, the Navy really needs energetic, visionary leadership today, because the world, particularly the Indo-PACOM part of the world, where the Navy and the Marine Corps will have to play a disproportionate role, is only going to get more intense and more dangerous.
I talked to Stavridis about the fact that the $2.2 trillion did not really include any money for shipbuilding. I am stunned by that still. I am told that was an OMB call that may not have actually reached the level of the president. But in a phase 5 or phase 6, it seems to me that would be criminal if that happened again. The noise versus signal here is we've got to send a signal to the People's Republic of China. That signal to me is both ship acquisition at every level, but especially forward appropriation on the replacement for the Ohio-class nuclear deterrent submarine. And Admiral Stavridis argues that's not even a Navy asset, that's a national asset. What do you think, Congressman? Are we going to get some forward funding of the Columbia class?
Well, we should. And I think the key thing you just said is China, right? The whole reason for doing this is to deter China in a time of crisis when we know already that China is, one, trying to exploit the crisis, which was of their own making, in order to advance their ideological agenda around the world, but also has threatened to cut off exports to the United States in the form of pharmaceuticals and plunge us into a sea of coronavirus. So we need to be sending a constant, strong signal to China that they should not test us while we're dealing with this crisis. And the Navy and Marine Corps team is uniquely positioned to do that. So what should we be asking for? What should the Navy be asking for? Well, I think most obviously we should ask for another SSN and another frigate. For the former, the top item in the Navy's FY21 unfunded priority list was a second Virginia-class sub, which would cost about $2.7 billion. And for the frigate, they need to award it. One of the things that Secretary Modly was talking about was speeding up the award for that competition. It was supposed to happen this month. It could happen any day now. But the current plan is to award a second frigate in April 2021. Why not just move that up a year? And again, the message of that would be to send a strong signal to the industrial base that not only is there a plan, but there's an enduring plan so that they can not only continue with their work, but also begin planning additional capital investments to expand capacity in the future. Beyond that, I would also build a couple new hospital ships, Hugh. They could be smaller with 500 and 250 beds, but we've seen the proven utility of the two we have. And I think when we look back on when we started to turn the corner on coronavirus, the image that I will always have in my mind is of the USS the Comfort and the Mercy arriving in LA and New York to provide help to two of our biggest cities that were dealing with the crisis in very acute ways.
I agree with that. I do want to pause though and say I think that the Department of Defense has been crippled by year-to-year budgeting for as long as I have been a reporter, and that's not in the Constitution. You can lump sum to defense contractors enough money to build an entire fleet of whatever it is they're building, whether it's airplanes, ships, or submarines, and they can steward that money subject to inspection, but it sends a huge signal down the defense chain, the supply chain, to ramp up. And I do not know why we are a prisoner of annual appropriations, except that it serves the political needs of members of Congress.
Well, in an ideal world, I think beyond defense for the entire budget, we go immediately to biannual budgeting, which we have in Wisconsin, which would help a lot. But you're right, we should be thinking about multi-year funding. Constitutionally, I do believe there is a provision that would prevent the Army currently, as written into the Constitution, from receiving multi-year funding. But I would not quibble with a constitutional scholar such as yourself, because I'm just a lowly Marine from Northeast Wisconsin. Here.
Well, let's remember that. Forward appropriation is not unconstitutional. Forward appropriation is it's done in 1 year. So you give all the money to the contractor in 1 year, in one budget. So it's not, you just give it to the contractor and they have to steward it and report back. That is not unconstitutional. Now, Congressman, are you in touch with the leader? McCarthy, are they gathering the Republicans up occasionally to try and coordinate a strategy for phase 5, 6, 7?
We are, in touch at least once a week as a caucus via conference calls. Some have been issue specific. We've had great calls with Dr. Fauci, who's made himself available on many occasions. And then I just would add that our mutual friend Liz Cheney is doing a great job of trying to corral the national security-minded members of the Republican caucus to think through things like what you just raised, which is to say, how do we fund defense in a 4.0 or a 5.0? How can we hold China accountable? How can we not take our eye off the ball in all the areas related to national security that we know we need to focus on? And so those discussions are underway right now. It's a practical and logistical problem that we are not in session. We are all back home in our districts. And as we saw with 3.0, there is no contingency planning right now for whether and how you could convene and or vote or even debate electronically. This has been actually a subject of debate for over 100 years, and it's not easy to get an institution like Congress to figure out how to do that in a way that is still safe from cyber interference or deepfakes.
I do believe that is a genuine problem, given what we've seen happen with Zoom this week. Let me close this way, Congressman Gallagher. When you were out talking to your constituents at 6 feet apart, at least, I hope, would you ask them what they think about their retirement money? Because I have been urging senators, but not many congressmen, that a lot of people are going to go get that money anyway because they need it, and we're going to tax them at whatever their rate is right now. I think that's appalling. They've saved that money for a rainy day. It was supposed to be their retirement money. They need it now. I think we ought to have a flat tax of 10%. But you ask your constituents what they want to do with their retirement money. I don't think they want to pay taxes on it. I know they waived the penalty for early withdrawal. I know they waived the mandatory distribution. But they all let people go get their money to get through this. I really think you'll find 100% agreement on that if you ask your constituents.
Well, Hugh, I think you're 100% right, and I will spread the gospel here in Northeast Wisconsin. I also think inevitably in any 4.0, we should think about it as a fix to 3.0, a 3.5, and in particular on the small business side. We know that there's going to be far more need than what we appropriated in the bill. I think as of yesterday, there were about 178,000 loans approved. They haven't been distributed yet. That's about $50 billion in total allocations for the $350 billion we appropriated. Think about that. The SBA typically processes about $30 billion a year. They've already exceeded that. And so this isn't a criticism of SBA, which is working overtime to try and get the job done. But I do think it's fair to say their systems are overwhelmed, and it's unclear for when borrowers will actually get their money. And I think most potential applicants I've talked to here in Northeast Wisconsin, even those who've actually applied for it, don't know whether the loan could be forgiven if they keep workers on the payroll, which obviously was a centerpiece of the program and a key incentive in there. So there's going to have to be a lot of action on the small business side. And I hope Speaker Pelosi will put aside any partisan effort to insert pet progressive projects in there and focus on those small businesses and individuals who really need help right now.
Clarity and certainty. Clarity and certainty. Congressman Gallagher, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Rep Gallagher. Follow him today at Rep Gallagher. What is going on in the markets brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, 888-888-1172. If you need to get money out of your house, they are still doing refinances. The 10-year Treasury this morning is at about 0.75%. It's beginning to stabilize, beginning to rise a little bit. That's good news. AndrewandTodd.com have a pipeline that is ready to lock when it is appropriate to lock, but you need to do your paperwork. So give them a call, 888-888-1172, or go online, which I think is preferred, AndrewandTodd.com, 2 D's and Todd, AndrewandTodd.com. Tell them where you live, tell them how much you owe on your mortgage, tell them what they need to know, and they will prepare the package that is best for you. If you are a senior citizen and you're wondering, what am I going to do? Now might be the time for a reverse mortgage. Overnight, Japan was up 2%. Hong Kong was down 1%. England and Germany are drifting below the line, but it's not bad. I have no idea what America's markets will do today. It always changes. They had a huge rally yesterday at the open. It ended up being down 26 points on the Dow, down 25 points on the NASDAQ, although Amazon was up $14 yesterday, and I believe it's becoming the reserve currency. I own it. I always tell people that, along with gold and Netflix. But we will see. Follow along. Just go to AndrewandTodd.com and go to ReliefFactor.com. I shorted him in the first hour, so I want to do a little bit longer this hour. ReliefFactor.com. I told you in the last 3 weeks, I've done more trundling. That's the combination of running and walking that I'm back up to. 30-plus miles last week. I've got degenerative disc disease, but it's because of taking my time, taking my pace, doing it every day, and taking advantage of the opportunity of having the ability to run socially distanced appropriately. And ReliefFactor.com. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega every single morning. Tens of thousands of people are doing new things. They're trying to do Pilates and yoga at home. Ugh, but I'm sure they strained their back. They're doing curls. Good. But you really need to be walking and running and raising your heart rate and making sure you're using the new muscle groups. And if they ache a little bit, support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains come from ReliefFactor.com. Don't forget Honor Bound coffee as well. Here I have my cup of coffee. It's lukewarm, but at least every dollar of profit from HonorBoundCoffee.com goes to support military families. Get your subscription today at HonorBoundCoffee.com. Come right back. Matt Yerbic is the CEO of Aviation Technical Services. Find out something interesting. Welcome back, America. Matt Yerbic is the CEO of Aviation Technical Services, employing 1,600 people in the maintenance, repair, and overhaul of America's airline liners. Good morning, Matt. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and good morning to you.
I want to cut to the bottom line. We passed $2.2 trillion in relief last week. A lot of that appears to be bound for foreign workers who work on American airlines. That is not what the Congress intended. How is that happening?
It's a great question. We are hopeful that through the process of this bill shaking out, that some of that gets clarified pretty quickly, that is not the intent. I think our grandchildren and children are going to be paying for this for quite some time, and we're hoping that we can put American workers back to work right away.
Now, maintenance, repair, and overhaul is what airline planes go through on a regular basis. Are you still working? Have you still got 1,600 people on the line repairing America's airplanes?
We don't. We have 450 left as of this week, and every one of them is painful. They're friends and family of mine in many cases, and right now we have less of them.
Now, I don't understand why America's airlines, whatever it is, United, American, Delta, Alaska, whatever it is, are not sending their planes in to get repaired and overhauled during this time of opportunity to do so. I would have thought you'd be booming right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're booming with airplanes that are in storage while the airlines sort this out. This is an incredible impact to the aviation industry. I feel terribly for our U.S. airline partners here. They are getting absolutely hammered with this. In some cases, demand down 80% or more. And right now, I think they're in a position of just trying to figure out, do they have a business or not? And what does that business look like on the other side of this?
But in the course of that, they still need to have those planes that they are flying or in storage repaired. I don't want that done abroad. What I have discovered is a lot of that is done abroad, and I don't want American money to be paying for that maintenance. Is that happening?
It is happening in some cases right now. I think in many cases, I'll tell you, what has happened generally is that much of it has stopped, except for those airplanes that require it. We run one of the safest industries in the world, I think, as you know, Hugh. And there is still maintenance being done, but at a much lower level, which I think is potentially indicative of what happens, again, on the other side of this. We are going to have less maintenance done because there are going to be less airplanes flying, very likely. And one of my missions in all of this, whether it's the aerospace and aviation industry or any others, is as a CEO of a business, for us to just take charge of ourselves and say we can put U.S. American workers first and bring them back to work as we start to fund this incredibly huge bill that is all about that.
Well, you see, Aviation Technical Services is not unlike my radio station, my museum that I run, my small business that I operate. Americans work for me in each of those capacities, and if this bill does anything, it ought to serve American workers. Now, I believe it ought to do it through the existing corporate structure because that's where the efficiency is. Has any part of this bill got anything for a medium-sized employer like you that was at 1,600 employees and is down to 450?
Well, we're down 450. I still have about 1,100 folks.
Oh, okay.
For clarity, we don't know is the answer. We have been working very closely with and we have fairly large operations in Washington State, in Missouri, in Kansas City area, and in Dallas, and we have been working with our elected folks in each of those areas to make sure that it does. We are named very specifically in one of the bills alongside the airlines that has to do with loans. But Hugh, we're really concerned about what that translates into. Giving a person on a company on life support more loans is not an answer to a situation like this.
No, it's got to be a cash infusion, and I think they unnecessarily complicated the loan forgiveness thing. It should have been, if you keep your employees, we'll give you a grant. And that's how simple it could be. Who's writing the regs at Treasury? I assume it's Treasury who is writing the regs on who gets the money. Am I right about that?
You are right. And one of the bills that we look for is called the Air Carrier Worker Support Act, and it has some very specific language about those grants. And I think one thing I would say is, I didn't start this year looking to come for a handout. We're in an incredibly unique situation, one that hasn't been seen maybe ever in terms of an economy being crashed. And it kind of makes me crazy to have folks out chirping about this being a bailout or a handout for me. This money is going to go, any money that I receive is going to go directly to getting more employees back to work. We run a good business. I've run a good business this is a 50-year-old business that I happen to be responsible for. And I want to make sure that it's around for 51 years.
Matt, we have to stand up the airlines because they're critical infrastructure. In order to stand up the airlines, we need to make sure that the maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities are still there, and I hope that Aviation Technical Services is among them. And I do not, God bless everybody abroad, we want to help them out. But if we have to stand up the American economy, we got to stand it up first in America, not in foreign suppliers of sometimes undercutting American workers, services, and goods. Matt Yerbic, thank you for joining me, CEO of Aviation Technical Services. I'm drilling down America because phase 4 and 5 is coming, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have not got America's workers back. They don't. Mitch McConnell does. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to my 400 affiliates across the United States and North America. I'm joined now in the Hugh Hewitt Show by Austan Goolsbee. He is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. He's also the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. You're a Cubs fan. We're sorry about that. But, Austan, welcome back. Good to have you, friend.
Yeah, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
I would like to know your opinion on what the United States should do in phase 4, 5, and 6 to reopen the economy.
Well, I'm confused by the phases. This feels like the second round. You know, we had the first big $2 trillion round of relief. I'm of the view, and there are a lot of economists that agree with me, or I agree with them, that the number one rule of virus economics is that the best way to restore the economy is to contain this rate of spread of the virus. I think that conventional stimulus doesn't work when people are afraid that the virus is not under control, which is not to say a vaccine or a treatment. Just we have to slow the rate of spread of that virus, because if we're in lockdown, and when we're in lockdown, the economy can't grow. Now, multiple countries have shown us how to prevent the economy from totally imploding. That is, if you look at Taiwan, if you look at Korea, now if you look at New Zealand, they're doing enough testing and enough tracing that the only people that go into isolation are the people who have the disease. And so they're not in lockdown, and their economies are not in free fall. But I think that's what I would do, is start throwing everything we have at wartime mobilization effort on stopping the spread of the disease, and simultaneously keep extending relief, administer it a little better, so that people can keep food on the table and not get thrown out of their houses while we wait to get that under containment.
Now, yesterday, Andrew Cuomo had a little bit of news that was missed by people, that the New York Department of Health has developed an antibody test. That echoed a similar release from the Mayo Clinic and a third potential antibody test from Research Triangle in North Carolina. Antibody testing with 99.97 degree certainty means you won't get it again. How important is it to scale that test to find out who is safe to send back into the workforce and into the public?
Yeah, that seems like it would be quite important. You know, in a weird statistical way, the accuracy of that test becomes critically important, which is to say, if you get false positives at some reasonable rate, what's normally reasonable rate, let's say 10% false positives, then unfortunately you would still have the problem that a bunch of people think they're immune, but they're not, and they go out and they get sick. But if that test has a very high degree of accuracy, like you're describing, that could be critical, because those are in a way, if you already had it and you recover, you're kind of a superhero. And so you could be doing deliveries, and you can be working at frontline responders, or you could be doing anything and go back to work. I'd say category 2 of when we could go back to work is if we did random testing, so you had an idea in different places of what's the baseline level of infection. Anywhere where the baseline level of infection is low enough that people are not afraid that if they go out of their house, they're going to get it from somebody who doesn't know that they have it. If the baseline level is low enough, then that kind of green zone idea is perfectly viable. But the impetus, the thought, the something that says, wow, this is so bad for the economy, let's just go take off the stay-at-home orders. A, I'm not sure that it will work, because I think a lot of people were starting to stay home before they even put the orders in place because they were afraid. And B, it threatens to move us back to square zero, where we have to go into lockdown again.
Yeah.
And the lockdown is the thing that's killing us.
Let me talk to you about the two ideas I've seen in circulation that I approve of. One is pandemic bonds. I know the president is considering it. Mnuchin is considering it over at Treasury, where the American people would be asked to help pay for relief in the way that they did in World War II and World War I at a maybe a negative rate of interest because interest rates are so low. And then secondly, a lot of Americans are going to have to reach for their retirement funds whether they want to or not. Now, the first bill took the 10% penalty off, and that's good. The first bill also said no mandatory distribution at 70.5 for a year. That's good. But I think if you have to go get your retirement right now, because there is no option, Austan, that we ought to have a flat tax that's much lower than the normal rate of return because this is an unprecedented circumstance. What do you make about bonds, and what do you make about, say, a 10% flat tax on retirement income withdrawals?
Well, let's start with the bonds. I favor the bonds. I think that's a good idea. It's important to recognize what you're trying to do there. Money in the language of the economists, money's fungible. So you're not doing anything by issuing a Corona bond that you use only for Corona. That all that does is that's government debt of just like any other form. What I like about the idea of Corona bonds is to make clear, as we did with war bonds, that this isn't a thing that should be revenue neutral. We should not be trying to find a way to pay for relief for what's a temporary one-time shock that was totally unexpected and is critically important. And so I think it is important for us to identify that, and I think the bonds, if they brought people together, that people could see, look, we're adding to the national debt, but it's for a specific purpose, and we have no problem doing that. I think that'd be great. Now, the weird irony, as you say, is interest rates are so low that offering the government zero interest rates is not even doing them a favor anymore.
That's correct.
Because the interest rates, are teetering on negative. On your flat tax idea, I got to tell you, I don't agree. I think one of the problems that I had with some sections of the CARES Act, the $2 trillion relief bill, I thought were great. Some I had some problems with, and most of the ones I had problems with are where they're steering the relief and the money to the wrong people, to the people who are not at risk of not being able to put food on the table, not at risk of being evicted from their homes and stuff like that. That's where we've got to make sure, in a way, if we could have forbearance and become Rip Van Winkle and go to sleep and wake up when this thing is done, in a way that'd be a good answer. Your 10% flat tax is by far the largest tax cut for people who are in the highest tax bracket.
It is, but Austan, let me
have a large amount of assets in savings, and if you have a large amount of assets in savings, if we have a fixed amount of money, I'm not wanting the money to get directed to people who are making $100,000+ a year.
But Austan, my argument is, I'm thinking of restaurant owners specifically, and I do not own a restaurant, nor will I ever own a restaurant. 3% have closed permanently, more than double digits threaten to do so. If those people have, and many of them have, retirement accounts, if they need to make their lease payment, they're going to go get that money. They're going to not give up their dream. Should we tax them at an ordinary amount when they've been prudent? Should we punish them right now when we ought to let them? Forbearance is better, but forbearance is not going to be available for everyone. I'm just trying to figure out how to keep these businesses alive so they can keep people employed.
I know you are. The only thing that I'm cautioning you is there are a whole that's not the. If you want to save the restaurant owners and other small businesses, I think the best way to do that is through a direct small business relief type fund rather than go to, just a guess, 95+% of the owners of big retirement accounts are not restaurant owners. So you're giving a big tax cut to a whole bunch of people.
Oh, they're air conditioning unit people. They're all over. they're all over the economy, but there's $12 trillion in assets there. And it's mostly because people have been successful in business that they don't want to close up. I'm thinking of an electrical contractor I know in LA who he employs so many people. Give it some thought, Austan. Keep coming back. Austan Goolsbee is one of those Democrats who ought to be on any national commission that talks about reopening the economy. There are good economists out there from the wrong side of the political aisle, but very good economists. Austan, thank you for joining me. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. Influencers are rising.
Jane, I had to prove like a proof for those, so I did that, and now I'm just working on this project, and this project takes a while, so I think I'm gonna do Jane. I had to prove like a proof for those, so I did that, and now I'm just working on this project, and this project takes a while, so I think I'm gonna do this and then head out for a run at 12:30. Probably gonna run for about 45 minutes. I've actually really been enjoying running outside lately. I'm always finding these new routes, and it's just really Jane. I had to prove like a proof for those, so I did that, and now I'm just working on this project, and this project takes a while, so I think I'm gonna do this and then head out for a run at 12:30. Probably gonna run for about 45 minutes. Probably gonna run for about 45 minutes. 30. Probably gonna run for Probably gonna run for about 45 minutes. I've actually really been enjoying running outside lately. I'm always finding these new routes and it's just really fun. I've been liking it. So I'd highly recommend getting some exercise outside. I'm also just gonna listen to news. This is when I listen to like news podcasts or just anything of that sort because it stresses me out less to listen to while I'm running, but I also think it's good to be informed. So that is usually when I do it. So let's just go ahead and head out. Everything that I'm wearing is from Lululemon.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. That's Michelle Reed. She is one of the rising young influencers. Believe it or not, you're listening to old media radio and really old media television, but out there on YouTube, there are hundreds, if not 1,000 new young influencers. Michelle Reed is one of them, joins me from Dallas early this morning. Good morning, Michelle. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here.
Tell people what a young influencer is and how you use YouTube.
Yes, so I am a YouTube creator, which essentially means that I make videos for an audience. My audience right now is at about 380,000 subscribers. So I'm 21 years old. I cover a lot of different topics from kind of post-grad life, finding a job, networking, relationships, and then I also incorporate my face in a lot of the videos that I make as well. But that's essentially what it is. It's super fun. I'm very fortunate to be able to do it.
Now, Michelle, this did not exist 5 years ago. This entire niche just began to spring up. How did you figure out that you had a place there? How did you develop a channel? And 380,000 followers on YouTube is a significant number. How did you do that?
Yeah, so it definitely didn't used to be as big as it is today. So I've been doing it since I was literally in middle school, and it really started just as a hobby of me making videos with my sister, like in my room. And then gradually YouTube has really evolved into people loving to watch this long form content. So they like watching videos that are like 20 minutes long. And I think it really makes people feel connected with people from a distance, which really plays into everything going on right now. But over the course of a few years, I think that my followers have just really grown up with me. And I used to do a lot of beauty and fashion content versus now I make a lot more lifestyle tips for people who are just kind of growing up in their 20s. And so I think it's kind of organically grown to the place it is today, and it's really fun. I love doing it.
What is your ambition for the channel, Michelle Reed?
I think my goal at the end of the day is just to be kind of a bright spot. I think that there's always a lot going on in the world, and I really like to feel that my followers feel a connection with me, and I kind of want to be that older sister that a lot of young women don't have, where you know, there's so many different influences that they can hear things about like dating and relationships and, you know, kind of having integrity in their jobs. And I think it's really important for people online to spread a good influence. And so at the end of the day, I really just do want to be kind of that older sister for these young women who don't have that. And it's kind of been my goal since the beginning.
So your Twitter handle is Michelle Reed YT. What does the YT stand for?
It stands for YouTube, but it's funny because I really don't use my Twitter. I used to be into Twitter, and I'm definitely now more of an Instagram person. So that is the mysterious YT, though.
How do people find you on YouTube?
I think that it has a lot to do with YouTube's algorithm. So I kind of have a core audience who are my subscribers who watch pretty much every video I put out. But then if you look at my videos, you'll see one will get a lot more views than another one, and that one most likely was just picked up by the algorithm and kind of spread out to a wider audience. And so it is really dependent on how YouTube kind of pushes out my videos. So videos that have certain titles perform better than others. They have certain keywords in the description of the video, and that's ultimately how you kind of gain a following, and then also just cross-promoting on Instagram or Twitter, other platforms to a different audience is also really helpful for kind of growing it.
And Michelle, we're all living at home. And so people are discovering new sorts of media. Are you finding that the young influencers of which you are a leading member of the cohort are rising dramatically in this stay-at-home period of time? 30 seconds.
Yes, I definitely think so. I think that we are really seeing people go online to consume their content, and people do have more time. And like I said, I think people are kind of looking for positivity apart from maybe what they're reading on the news. And so I think it's a really great time for influencers to kind of gain an audience and just put out content for people.
I 100% agree, and I believe there's a new generation rising. Michelle Reed is among them. Go to youtube.com, just search her name, 2 L's in Michelle. Michelle Reed, or you can follow her on the old school Twitter, Michelle Reed YT, or on Instagram. I'll be right back, America. We're going to go back to old school Arthur Herman on what did we do in World War II. Stay tuned.
Well, there's 5 minutes of my life I'll never get back.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt in the ReliefFactor.com studio inside of the Beltway, mourning the loss of John Prine, great American singer-songwriter who succumbed to the coronavirus last night. I'm joined by Arthur Herman, senior fellow of the Hudson Institute. Been the guest of my show before. Follow him on Twitter at Arthur L. Herman. I want to talk to him about a book I've never talked with him about before. Good morning, Arthur. How are you and your family doing?
We're doing okay. My parents, my mother's going to be 90 in June, and fortunately they live in a community in Wisconsin. They've had 0 coronavirus cases, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and that is I'll be able to visit my parents by the end of the summer.
Knock on wood. Now, Arthur, I wanted to talk to you about your book, Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. Has anyone from the administration called you about, you studied the Defense Production Act's predecessor. It seems relevant to me, this book right now. Anyone called you up about it?
Oh, yeah. I've been, Hugh, I've been on the phone with administration officials, with TV interviewers, with members of defense technology associations, including the Aerospace Industries Association. And I know that Peter Navarro, who was really the driving engine of the coronavirus production machine, and the man who really, I think, has emerged as one of the big heroes out of this whole process. He's a huge fan of the book. We've talked about the book. I know he gives copies to visitors. This was even before this whole crisis came down on us. So I'm very happy to see that the lessons that I wrote about in that book, about how we really did manage to outproduce the rest of the world and the Axis powers with war materiel by tapping into America's innovation and most productive companies, that we've got an administration and someone like Peter Navarro who really understands and has taken to heart those lessons.
Now, Arthur, I have been reading as part of my long walks alone, been listening to the great Citizen Soldier book by Stephen Ambrose. And we went from 165,000 standing army in 1939 to 8 million men in the field, and we supplied them logistically with everything they needed. It is sometimes overwhelming to consider what this country made in 5.5 years. Is there any reason we cannot make what the world needs for the virus?
I don't think so. I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that we could be the arsenal to combat coronavirus and future viruses. But there's a couple of key things we have to keep in mind, Hugh, about what was the difference between where we were in 1940, which is when we began the ramp-up for wartime production, first to help Great Britain and then, of course, to arm ourselves for the conflict we knew was coming. The first difference is that in 1940, the means of production, the supply chains, as we would say today, for manufacturing and for industry, were all here. They were all in the United States. Today we've got supply chains that are spread all across the world, and unfortunately, as we're finding out, a large number of those supply chains terminate in China, not least for our pharmaceuticals and healthcare products. That's one of the challenges that we're going to have to take on, and we're taking on now by trying to get so many companies to shift to help manufacture PPEs, to manufacture ventilators, and to get that kind of production underway and take it away from places where we've had to rely in the past, including China. But that's going to be one of the long-term impacts of this, Hugh, is going to be realizing we can't afford to have our supply chains, our vital supply chains for products and for even defense systems terminating in China.
There are three areas. One is pharmaceuticals. You named the second one, defense system. And then one which I think stands apart, which is the nuclear power industry. We need to mine, we need to convert, and we need to enrich. And we need to do it all in American factories from American mines, and we need to do it yesterday, and we're not doing it.
I can't disagree. And you know what? And the technology for nuclear power and the kinds of nuclear power plants that we have today, which are smaller, safer, and more efficient, that don't even produce large quantities of plutonium as earlier generations of nuclear reactors did. This is a huge priority for us, not just for our own energy independence, but also because China has seen this as a huge opportunity for them to proliferate their own nuclear technology to countries like France, countries in Europe and in Asia, when their safety standards are not up to ours and when their reliability is not what we can deliver in the nuclear power industry. I think that's another one of the areas in which we're going to see more and more in a green light, Hugh, because zero carbon emissions with nuclear power. And that's another big change that I think is going to come out when we come to the end of this episode and look back and say, how do we avoid being stuck in a crisis like this again?
Now, Arthur Herman, you're a historian. There is another major difference, and it pains me to bring it up. I have a piece in the Washington Post today about Jared Kushner and the fact that he's getting assailed by slings and arrows, even though he is doing yeoman's work that even Bill de Blasio has commented him on. And that difference is the era of patriotism in 1941, after we were attacked, was nearly universal. And even those who were isolationists to the core flipped on a dime and became 100% in the struggle. I don't see that happening in America right now. Do you?
What I see is increasingly that the critics of the Trump administration, having failed to bring him down with the Russia hoax, having failed to bring him down on the Ukraine phone call, are now thinking that maybe they can finally get rid of Trump by emphasizing and focusing on the COVID-19 response, when they themselves, Hugh, are culpable for the degree to which they distracted this country through the impeachment crisis and the degree to which so many of them have been complicit in expanding China's influence and expanding the China lobby as an important factor in distorting our economic relations and economic fortunes. And I think you're right. I think that what is going to come out of all of this, too, is another look at just what the cost of partisan warfare and politicization of every issue, especially by the mainstream media, has been for all of us. And if China has great culpability, and I think we need to hold them accountable for the damage that they have done to the world by allowing this virus to propagate and to metastasize, I think we also have to look at the degree to which mainstream media and a certain political party in Washington have distorted our political lens so that this crisis came upon us when we were really unprepared to deal with what was really coming here. Thank goodness that the Trump administration and officials in the administration like Peter Navarro had their eyes on the ball and weren't distracted by all of the partisan warfare that was unfolding in Washington, as you remember, through November, through December, and even into January.
And February. Arthur Herman, you're at the Hudson Institute, and therefore you are a successor in interest in one respect to the great Herman Kahn. Arthur Herman is succeeding Herman Kahn, a futurist. I believe one of the profound consequences, I'm very certain about this, is that American media credibility is shattered. And I mean shattered. I don't know that they ever get it back. The audience has already crashed. I think it will continue to crash, and something else will rise in its place. I just talked to a young YouTube influencer. What do you think? Can they ever get it back?
No, I think that that they're so stuck and jammed into a mindset that really unfolded after Watergate. The hubris on the part of the mainstream media that they can make and break presidents at will, I think, is part of that mentality, and it has done enormous damage to the political institutions of our country, to our political culture, and now today I think we have to say that it may be costing us human lives in the degree to which a distorted message about what this administration is doing in response to the COVID crisis, where that crisis originated, namely in China, and the degree to which China has to assume culpability around the world for what has happened, and that shipping, plane loads of respirators and ventilators just isn't going to do it. This, I think, Hugh, is going to be China's Chernobyl. I think it's going to have enormous impact both on the domestic scene within China, but also in wrecking China's reputation as a country and as a power that you want to do business with and that you can trust, even on the most important matters of life and death.
It could well be a Khrushchev moment as well. We'll see whether or not the Politburo in Beijing thinks of President Xi what the Politburo in the old Soviet Union thought of Khrushchev when the time came to change. Arthur Herman, the book is Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. Must reading for anyone who concerns himself with how we deal with the virus today. Thank you, Arthur. Always a pleasure. Time for me to check on the markets because AndrewandTodd.com are still lending money. That's what Sierra Pacific Mortgage does. They lend money to people who need to get money out of their house. Austan Goolsbee doesn't want you to get it out of your retirement account. I do, but you might be able to get it out of your house tax-free and consult your accountant, but consult AndrewandTodd.com first. 888-888-1172. Fill out the application. Answer a couple of questions. They will come back to you with the very best idea for what to do with your home. Absolutely the very best idea with what to do, whether or not you ought to refinance it, whether you ought to put some of the money that you've got left into real estate. Maybe you made money because you had bonds when this started and they went up and you want to diversify into real estate. New home purchasers are out there saying, this is a pretty good time to go buy a house. Yes, indeed it is, if you can figure out how to do it in a socially responsible fashion. The people to talk to, Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian, AndrewandTodd.com. I know them. I trust them. They just closed a loan for a young couple in D.C. I know. They're working with Gordon Wood all through the HQ2 setup from people in Seattle who are listening right now in Seattle and moving to Virginia. You want to call Gordon Wood. You want to call Andrew and Todd, 888-888-1172. Overnight, Japan went up 2%. Hong Kong went down 1%. England and Germany are open right now, and they're off a little bit, but it's not too bad. Looks like it could be a very good day on our market. We do not know. I never know. I never predict the day on the market because it just goes up and down. As we find our equilibrium and as good news continues to spread, it's picked up first in the marketplace. You can pick up a great rate for your refinance or your purchase at AndrewandTodd.com. Let me remind you of ReliefFactor.com as well. After the show today, I got to do a couple pre-records, and I'll be out in a rain-soaked, wet, damp, and windy Washington, D.C. But I don't care because I've got my ReliefFactor.com already at work within me. Actually, I carry curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. They are the one thing that you need. I mentioned oxygen because I got my new power ring, which measures oxygen level in the blood. I'll tell you about that another time. ReliefFactor.com. Make sure you have the support for the temporary relief of minor aches and pains that comes with aging and exercise. A lot of Americans are doing new sorts of exercise. You got to get your heart rate up. You got to exercise. You're definitely getting older. Give ReliefFactor.com a try. And please remember HonorBoundCoffee.com. Pete and Seth Talbot are great Americans. They started ReliefFactor.com, father-son team. They also said we're going to give back to America's military families. They did that by buying a coffee company and branding it HonorBoundCoffee.com and committing 100% of the profits from every dollar they make in the black from Honor Bound Coffee to, they began with the Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund. They've moved into the military YMCA. They are going to help. Every cup of coffee you drink should be an HonorBoundCoffee.com subscription coffee. Go there right now, HonorBoundCoffee.com. Come back for Jim Daly of Focus on the Family. Welcome back, America. There's one trusted name in America. It's Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family has been focusing on the family for a generation now. I'm joined by its president, its CEO, Jim Daly. Hello, Jim. Welcome to the program. Great to have you.
Yeah, good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I am great. How is the Daly family and the larger Focus on the Family doing in this age of the virus?
Yeah, we're actually doing well. Our college student came home, and he's been with us 3-4 weeks now, and we've been doing a lot of things that families sometimes don't have time to do. Just building models together, playing basketball out in the driveway, taking hikes together. It's been, actually, for us, it's been a time of pulling together. So it's been a benefit, even though it's been hard on the routine. Focus is open. We, ironically, we had a 1-year plan that we had been working on for disaster recovery. We were 2 weeks away from finishing it when this thing hit. So we were already prepared to have people work from home. The call center's open. The counseling lines are open for Focus. Everybody's at home working. So we were just ahead of the curve, and I'm grateful to the Lord for it.
Talk to me a little bit about those counseling lines, Jim Daly, because it seems to me a lot of people are under a lot of stress, especially those who are in 12-step programs that cannot meet. That's been on my mind since I saw a CNN story on it 3 weeks ago, and it never occurred to me that, oh my goodness, these people who are in recovery need to go to groups and they can't go.
It's terrible, and especially where you need that group interaction, that help, and that's been the load of our calls has been in that place where marriages that have been struggling, this kind of pressure puts additional weight on those fractures that are already there. So we're getting calls for marital help, parents who can't cope, they're struggling with their kids, their teenagers. But the most severe is the point you made, those that are in recovery programs, alcohol addiction, drug addiction. And the isolation is the worst possible thing for these people. And it's unfortunate right now. If you have a family member, for the listeners, great time to call that person who maybe has been struggling with something like that or has overcome it. But this is the kind of environment where people will lean back into those things to cope.
How do they contact Focus on the Family, Jim Daly? What's the best way for them to avail themselves of the resources that Focus has out there, not just for people in recovery, but for families generally?
Yeah, the two ways. The phone number, 1-800-A-FAMILY. That'll get you there, along with the website, which is focusonthefamily.com.
And so when you call 1-800-A-FAMILY, you just say, I need this sort of help. Is that what you do?
Absolutely, yeah. We're still getting, about 1,000 calls a day right now, and about 100 to 200 of those calls will go to our counseling center. They'll take a number and they'll call you back as soon as they can catch up to the load, but it'll be within a day or two.
Now, Jim Daly, back when I worked for PBS for a decade in Los Angeles, it was always the case that crisis, whether it was the riots in 1992 or anything like that, led to dramatic increases in domestic abuse and child abuse. And I'm just being very blunt now. People are on the edge. They're stuck in small spaces. They've got screaming kids. What do you urge these people to do?
Well, I mean, one of the major things you have to do is take a deep breath and relax. If you're a person who leans toward anger as a reaction, it's a trigger for you. Somebody says something, somebody does something. And in your home of origin, as you're growing up, you probably saw your dad or maybe your mom flash to anger, and it's a coping mechanism. I would say to that person, you've got to separate. I mean, not just social distancing. You got to get out of the way, take a walk, get outside, let a little space occur. Try to figure out why those irritations drive you to that point. That'd be great work for you to do in this moment. But the main thing is you got to empathize, you got to identify. These poor kids, even teenagers, we have two teens, 19 and 17-year-olds. When life gets disrupted, when the normalcy of life gets disrupted, we tend to move into some quirky behavior. Maybe we're short-fused, maybe we're disrespectful. Who knows what it could be? But the point being, you got to empathize with people, back up a little bit, ask questions. Why are you acting like this? Why did you say that to me in that way? Love people in your family right now. That's the key, how to love people and be confident in your family. That's what I would say.
You know, Jim, I've got a Washington Post column up today that quotes the late Alex Haley, because Lamar Alexander always quotes him, find the good and praise it. I think encouragement and praise of the good right now is probably the critical ingredient that is most missing in the society.
That's a great statement. And, there's some researchers that say we need about 10 praises for every one critical criticism and or critical comment. So use that formula, 9-1. That's
9-1.
Do it.
Find the good and praise it, and call Focus on the Family if you need help. 1-800-A-FAMILY or focusonthefamily.com. 1-800-A-FAMILY. Jim Daly, follow him on Twitter at Daly Focus, D-A-L-Y. Focus, you Steelers fans, D-A-L-Y. Focus. Thank you, Jim. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Adam, Generalissimo, Ben, thank you all for working overtime. Thanks, everyone out there, for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with the next virus edition of The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hughiverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hughiverse.com.
Hi, it's Hugh Hewitt. You know, over the years that I've been with Salem, 20 years now, I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing not-for-profits. The Salvation Army, the Food for the Poor Group, Prison Fellowship. Now there is a new sponsor on Salem that I'm very, very proud to introduce to you now. It's the Global Healthy Living Foundation. And you can find it at ghlf.org. That's ghlf.org, Global Healthy Living Foundation. I'm joined by its co-founder, Seth Ginsberg, right now. Seth, good morning. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, Mr. Hewitt.
Please call me Hugh. I'm not that old. Seth, where do I find you this morning?
So I'm out in eastern Pennsylvania right now, along with my family, trying to take each day as it comes. We're native New Yorkers from the Northeast